don't see me. Hey yo, scratching my head, sticking the rhymes, thinking the time, drinking finishing lines, drinking wishing the time with her, sitting up vibing her. She don't have any fucking clue what time it is. That's why I'm rhyming. This is dime for the finalists. If you keep it real, the deal is.
Welcome to the people of Portland and beyond, episode 51. Today in studio for our 51st episode is Lance Vallis. And how many bands are you in? What band were we just listening to right now?
That band was a band
See where I'm at. Sometimes I kind of blend it with the rest of these cats, and that's whack. It's out, sad to keep intact. It's always a bar scene that can be a hash.
Not pretty regularly, twice a week for a few years. Played generally in the Boston area, in the city,
What's up, bro? Gotta say, I was down with your style. And I'm wishing now that you ain't been around for a while. Now I'll lie, so you know you can believe in your friend. Wanna say the hope that one day I'm see you again. Guess I was the type of dude that you knew how to please. Homemade fried chicken, macaroni, and cheese. Never chewing me up, but I was quite understood. Making love all day when you was tired as I could. Sounded sexy as hell when you were screaming and moaning. Had to right away whenever you and me were alone. The vibrations of love and going through the place.
What brought you to Portland?
From in Portland, good question. It's basically just wanting to have a change of pace. There's sort of kind of a short answer. The longer answer is I was working in music as a guitar teacher. I guess I'll tell the whole story. So basically, when I was after high school, went to college and was in school in upstate New York in Albany, Albany.
Yeah.
Was a psychology major and was passionate about music in high school, was considering going into music right after high school. My dad, who is a musician, cautioned against doing that. So it was going to be a struggle. And he was a musician. I figured I could trust what he had to say. He had a perspective on this and thought, okay, well, he should know. And so decided to go pursue liberal arts degree at SUNY. And
Which SUNY?
SUNY Albany.
Okay.
And so get to my senior year there, and I guess I didn't fully realize that with a degree in psychology, or at least a bachelor's degree, there's really nothing in the field of psychology that you can get hired for in that field.
How far into that did you realize that?
I guess towards the end.
Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah, I guess it was sort of like, I don't know. It's hard to say. I can't really remember specifically back to when I was in my early 20s. But I knew that getting a college degree was important. And that was sort of like my guiding principle, I suppose. But I guess what I was leading up to, it was decision time. What am I going to do after graduation? Do I feel that passionate about psychology where I now want to go pursue an advanced degree and a graduate degree in psychology? Or is music still pulling at me? And this side of music is still there for me. It's still a passion of mine. It appealed to me more than 2 more years, or however many more years of psychology training. And so my senior year, I started to apply to a couple of different colleges, one of which was Berkeley College of Music. And that brought me to Boston, birthplace. And so fortunately, when I got to Berkeley in Boston, I was a freshman again.
Yeah.
And was not really keen on spending the money or the time to earn a second bachelor's degree over the next 3 years. And so got what I could out of the about a semester and a half I was there. 1 semester full time, and then over the summer, a couple of courses. So I'm getting to your question about Portland.
Okay.
By the way. So over time, after leaving Berkeley, I kind of pieced together a schedule of working as a guitar teacher, and was kind of supplementing that with temp work, working in different offices. And over time, it took a few years, but I was able to piece together kind of a full-time schedule of teaching lessons. And that was great. It was never especially stable, however. So students would leave town for, summer vacation or Christmas break. And, I was sort of a contractor. So didn't come with any benefits, no health insurance, no 401k, nothing like that.
Yeah.
And so just the instability of that ultimately kind of ran its course for me. And I had one summer in particular where it was just extremely slow, and kind of always had it in the back of my mind that I needed to transition out of teaching lessons and at least relying on that as my bread and butter and my full-time moneymaker. And so that led to me working in different offices, in software, tech support. The last job I had was working for a GPS company as a trainer. And,
Right.
and these are all sort of entry-level jobs. I didn't really have any experience, certainly no college training on these, I got these through different agencies. And after a few years of doing that full-time and doing music on the side and not really being happy with the direction everything was going in, wasn't in a serious relationship, wasn't really in the job I was really that crazy about.
How old were you?
Like late 30s, mid 30s.
Okay.
Yeah, I stopped teaching lessons about 32, 33 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 46 now. And so that, I guess it led me to question everything. And what do I want to do? What am I getting out of being here? And, I definitely had good connections and good friends in Boston, but that was sort of what I felt was the most I had going for me at that point. And was kind of curious to try the West Coast, see what that was like. I had never really, so I've met a lot of people when I was living in Boston who had bounced around, tried living in different parts of the country. And had never really done that. Just went from Long Island, where I grew up, Albany for a few years for college, Boston. And that was it. There was a quick stop in Chicago for a couple of months. So I was dating somebody there. But, no significant length of time anywhere else really. And had never really been to the West Coast. Wanted to just kind of check out something new. Had heard good things about Portland. And I guess it was part of the trend of people moving to the city. So that's kind of what brought me here, was I guess just trying to find something new. Wanted to get back in touch with music.
Where on Long Island did you live? I also grew up there.
I grew up in a town called Albertson, which no one has heard of.
No.
But it's very close to Mineola, very close to Roslyn.
Yeah. Those are train stops.
Yeah, Mineola is the big train stop that we generally.
So is it south of the train or north of it?
I think Albertson is a little bit further north, although Albertson does have a train station. It's not one of the main arteries out of Manhattan.
It won't go straight to Manhattan.
It won't. No, you'll have to transfer, and sometimes you have to transfer in Jamaica to get to
Jamaica, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
So expensive to travel in New York. When's the last time you've been there?
I was there, within a year. It may have been Thanksgiving time. I'm trying to remember. I think that was it. I'm going back in July, actually. So
I think it was like $10 at least to get into the city, either by car. I guess you could take it in with the PATH train from Jersey, and that's probably like $20 to get in, over $20 at this point for sure.
Yeah, it depends on if you're traveling peak or off peak hours or rush hour.
Yeah,
I think they call it peak, and it's a few dollars more one way. Yeah, it's an expensive city. However you slice it, you're paying a toll whether you drive in or and then dealing with the traffic and the frustration of parking.
Yeah.
So it's just as well to take the train and maybe spend a little bit more and be done with it and not have the car and just use the subway.
Do you play local music around Portland?
Yeah, kind of comes and goes. Let's see, what do I have? Like, for example, I'm doing a gig in about a week and a half with kind of a pop rock cover band called The Groove. And that's the corporate gig, like a corporate event. The clubs, sometimes, I played for a few years every Sunday doing solo guitar at a restaurant called Tapalaya.
Nice. Jazz guitar?
Yeah, solo guitar.
With a looper pedal or just...
No. I mean, I guess I could compare it to somebody like Joe Pass. I don't think I'm anywhere near somebody near that level.
See, like an influence of yours?
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think I'm a little bit more of a band player than a solo guitar player. And the solo guitar thing kind of happened by necessity / request. I've also did a lot of stuff on cruise lines, playing on cruise ships.
How did you get the cruise? Like, how did you get the idea to play on a cruise ship?
It's kind of connected to the whole moving to Portland thing. So I I got to Portland, kind of, I guess maybe to wrap up the story I was telling earlier, you know, from Boston to Portland, and really try to make a go of music. And as I imagine you're aware, it's just a challenge to do music full time, regardless of where you are, whether it's Boston or
and Portland, even harder in the last 20 years.
For sure. Right. Yeah. The infrastructure and the environment, it's just not like it had been.
Yeah.
Many reasons. And I talked about this with the guy who runs the local union, actually, and there's all sorts of reasons. But what I guess what led me to Ships was, do what I could on land here, networking, working on my website, going to jam sessions, hitting out Craigslist. And I was meeting people, and things were, had a certain direction, but kind of slowly. And, somebody actually in the band who were just listening to 7-Ill, one of the guys in the band, put it perfectly years ago. And it's kind of held true. And I think a lot of people can relate to this in music, that I feel like you're constantly working fairly hard to make baby steps of progress. And that's exactly what was happening. I was making progress, but it was kind of slow. It was kind of steady, but it was definitely slow. And it wasn't like, I'm almost there. It never quite got to a point where it was clearly just about to break through. And so after a few months of this networking and going to jams and seeing progress, but not really significant progress, it was like, okay, well, what else can I do? And I'd actually done a quick ship contract when I was a lot younger, for just a few weeks, working for Carnival, and wasn't really smitten with it, and didn't really do it. But I guess it was a little bit ironic in a way, having just moved to Portland in 2011 is when I got here. And then in March 2011, by that summer, I had committed to trying to audition, or I should say actually auditioning for these different agents that place musicians on ships.
How many auditions had you done before you got it?
So it kind of went a little bit out of order. I think the very first audition that I did, I applied with several different agencies. The very first one that I did ultimately wound up that agency placing me on a contract, but after that auditioned for another agent who placed me on my first contract. I did that for a few months. It was in Hawaii, out of Honolulu, for 4 months. And then the first agent that I auditioned for actually placed me on my second contract. So it just had to do with the availability of, it just depends on who their connections are, what their need is at the time. And it was just a coincidence or just happenstance, I should say, that the second agent had availability sooner than the first agent. So,
okay.
But yeah.
And they just placed you with a random band that you had not played with before.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So
had you had that experience before?
Yeah, generally. I mean, I had done a lot of stuff with musical theater, particular theater in the Boston area called the Company Theater.
Yeah. Amazing
conductor there, Michael Joseph, who's since moved on to New York City. And so basically you have 4 rehearsals, three sort of maybe 2 rehearsals just with musicians, and then the final 2 are somewhat like dress rehearsals with the cast and actually going through the cues and whatnot. And generally you get the sheet music ahead of time. I think actually always would get the music ahead of time, and there's usually a cast recording that you can reference and get some guidance and kind of get up to speed that way, because rehearsal is minimal.
Yeah.
On the ships, it's not quite like that. You meet each other for the first time, and you could very well have flown across the country or even around the world, and then play that night
without practicing.
Without having gotten the music ahead of time. You just get the sheet music, and there's definitely a certain amount of forgiveness. I don't think they necessarily expect it to be note perfect, and they also don't give you stuff that's especially challenging.
Okay.
And if you did get something that was challenging, you probably wouldn't just get it at 5 o'clock that day for a 7 o'clock show. But there's definitely a little there's an adjustment period there. Cat's hungry.
As far as a special purpose band, you've been playing with them since 2016. How did you meet them?
Yeah, that's interesting. So a friend of mine suggested doing a funk band, and I thought that's a great idea. So the two of us started to talk about putting that together, and had a drummer and I think a bass player in mind. My friend Ben played piano, played keys.
Yeah.
And so we had a jam. It didn't really go anywhere, and Ben decided he didn't have time for it any longer. But I had since, after he had suggested, kind of gotten in my head, I want to keep moving forward with this, and decided to try and work to put something together. And in 2016, had a little core of guys, same guys. Never quite got to like a full band. Certainly not like Seven Ill, where it's definitely the same guys who are locked in for years. But a bass player and a drummer that I played with pretty regularly, and a keyboard player who was there for the first few months, then decided, he was doing it in his spare time. He worked in software.
There's a picture on the site, so
different guys. Yeah. So
Okay.
the drummer who's sitting right next to me, to my, I guess if you're looking at the photo,
Yeah.
left of me, that's
Okay.
the drummer, Forrest Carter.
Okay.
Great drummer. Plays with one or two bands around town. Plays with Far Out West. Does a lot of shows with the Flat Nines.
Mm-hmm.
Other bands rather. Giraffe Dodgers is another band. So yeah, Forrest was around from the beginning, and in fact, it was his house that we would jam at. And this other guy, Dave Smith, played bass player, songwriter for Sweet and Juicy,
Yeah.
local band. And this guy, Dave, is it Howland? Something like that. Anyway, another Dave played keys. That Dave wound up not wanting to do, I guess, the sort of like funk, jazz, rock, psychedelic fusion kind of thing I was doing, but kind of preferred to do more like swing standards, that sort of stuff, real book stuff.
Okay.
And ever since, more or less, had a revolving door for the keyboard player. Tough to find regular keyboard players. The good ones are generally pretty busy.
Artwork for this album looks pretty amazing. Who did that?
Yeah, Luna Malin Christine.
Nice.
Yeah, she's got an Instagram page called Gem of Niles, and she's I met her at Goodfoot. She does a lot, I hadn't seen her do it in a while actually, but for a while there, I'd seen her doing live painting during the show.
Really?
At Goodfoot, yeah.
That is cool.
Yeah, it's just the start of the show just be a blank canvas, and then by the end there was a painting, and then she would sell it.
Nice.
Yeah, and so just loved her work. And she kind of put out there like maybe close to a year before I went into the studio to record.
Yeah.
With Special Purpose. You can also have your custom, basically like soliciting like a commission, and didn't really have a need at that point. But then when I started to put the recording together and book studio time, it's like, oh, well, I should maybe get back in touch with her and see about having her do the artwork for it.
Yeah.
And I gave her a rough mix of one of the songs.
Okay. That's awesome.
Yeah. And felt a little bad because the song's only 5 or 6 minutes. So it's like, I can imagine her just getting sick of the song, but she did a great job.
Nice.
And it's actually on specialpurposeband.com. There's an artwork link you can click on and see everything that she did. And some of it's sort of like variations on a theme. And then there's other things that are doesn't look like anything else. Just an amazing job. Yeah. Really creative.
Nice. Do you guys plan on doing another album?
That's a good question. On one hand, I'd like to. I definitely have some songwriting ideas in mind that aren't quite fully fleshed out at all, and I need to develop those. This recording came out in February when it was all finally set and done. With the mastering and the mixing. But we went into the studio in October last year. A few weeks for overdubs, and then after that. How to master the thing, and there was a process for getting it up online, getting the distribution through CD Baby and whatnot.
And influences would be like Jeff Beck, Fish, Steely Dan, Return to Forever, anything else?
I think it generally leans towards that,
Psychedelic rock, jazz funk, fusion.
Yeah, yeah. Depending on the song, maybe. I don't know if every song hits all of those markers. But I would say, there's no vocals. I should point out it's all instrumental, so maybe closer to something like Jeff Beck than Fish.
And the album Password, you wrote the whole thing, every instrument, every layer.
Certainly not the solos.
Okay.
And not. I had some help with the arrangements, but definitely the genesis of the song ideas.
Okay.
I came up with everything in that regard. I wrote all the melodies. Certainly had some, depending on the song, because when we went to the studio, some songs were newer than others, and the newer songs I didn't quite have an arrangement completely clear in my mind. Like I may have written a melody for the chords, and
so the recordings kind of start to evolve in the studio.
Not so much evolve, but actually say, okay, here's the chords that we play for the melody. Now, how do we take solos over these chords? Do we just run through the exact same progression in the song form? Right. Or do we split it up and say, okay, we'll do this half here, and then we'll do like the second half there. So keyboard solo, we'll take the first half of the progression, and then for the guitar solo, we'll take the second half. I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but something along those lines.
Do you find yourself using similar chords in order to get like an album feel?
I don't know if there's any intentionality as far
like to use like more sevenths. I don't know.
So the songs sound like they kind of came from the same sort of batch, something like that.
Yeah. Maybe you have like some sad songs, some happy songs. How did you go about your track order and selection?
For the final track listing of the recording?
Exactly.
I guess intuition, I guess I had I'm trying to remember. I guess I wanted to mix it up so I wouldn't want to have two songs in a row that had a similar vibe.
Yeah.
I think that was a guiding principle.
Slower songs kind of break up with the more action-packed, I guess.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to hit the ground running with more of a rocker, so Hyperbole, I thought fit the bill. They gave me a little grief at the recording studios because I thought, okay, let's start with Hyperbole. It's the first song on the record. Yeah. And it was like 11 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. And I said something like, just starting with the heavy one, huh? Like,
How long is that one?
4 or 5 minutes.
What's your longest song?
The last song on the record called Phoenix.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a psychedelic, trippy. In fact, the working title was Trippy B Minor Jam, which the recording engineer always wanted to refer to it. Yeah. Even though it was like the working title, and then Forrest actually came up with naming it Phoenix after listening to it in the studio. Yeah. But Steve, the recording engineer, just constantly afterward, I know what you're talking about, Phoenix, but we do have something called Trippy B Minor Jam. Is that what you're talking about? And it's just like the running joke.
It's like my friend. We used to have a song called like Life and Times Restrictions, and he would just call like LITR. He's like, no, it's called Lighter Now. And there was another song that running title was like Ask, because that was like the first word of the song. Yeah. I'm like, no, it's called Shadow of Denial now. He's like, no, it's Ask.
It's still Ask.
Yeah. So when you first started recording, did you use like a little tape recorder or whatever?
For getting the songwriting ideas down?
Yeah, when you're like younger.
Oh, I guess the tape recorder. This kind of gets at the heart of, I guess, what I've been thinking about in terms of what music holds for me. Because I kind of, for the most part, consider myself less of a composer, less of a songwriter, more of a, I guess, interpreter or improviser or something like that, or
live musician.
Collaborator. Live musician, less of a studio musician in terms of like, I have, this music that's just inside me, and I have all these songwriting ideas that I now want to develop. And, I've never really been big on lyrics.
Yeah.
I don't know if we were talking about it when we were recording, but like, I'm not really a singer. Like, I'll do it somewhat reluctantly, and like, I kind of enjoy it, honestly. But, like I was saying before, I don't really work on my voice like I do on my guitar playing, and so in a certain sense, I feel like, I really, spend time, like that's my passion, is playing the guitar. Less about singing, getting, hitting my pitches, getting a nice timbre on my voice. I can do it, but it's not really my passion.
You don't have that kind of desire, because it's more of a challenge to try to go for that. But I think it's probably wiser to stick on your trajectory and stick with what you're good at, right?
I mean, that's sort of like the question. Like, it's the path of least resistance for sure.
Yeah.
That's where my passion lies. And like that whole concept of, do you try and develop what you're strong at and just make that stronger and stronger, or do you like take your weaknesses and try and make those stronger, right? And so that's, maybe I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but I think that's generally the dichotomy.
Some things are just impossible though. Like I know I can never play drums. Like it's just not in me. Like I've thought about it and I don't have that timing, and I think about how drummers do have the timing and it blows my mind. But I'm a guitarist that could do all these amazing solos and that blows their mind. And you know what I'm talking about?
I do. And it's one of those things that I think about a lot, and I go back and forth on it, where I think oftentimes people will use the words talent when they really mean skill. But or sometimes people will kind of push back when they say, oh, that, this musician or whoever is so talented.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I'm sure. However, they developed their talent and they spent hours and hours working on their talent and trying to get better at it. And they didn't just spring forth from the womb hearing what you're hearing now with this final product. They developed their talent.
Yeah.
But I think, and so it gets maybe a little bit more kind of mixed together and unclear, because they had a starting point, which is their talent, that was maybe higher than other people, but then they developed it, and that's where the skill comes in. And so some of us are naturally drummers, and it's like they're drawn to it. I agree with you. Like I'm not a drummer at all.
Right.
And so
have you tried it?
Here and there, like I never really had a drum set like readily available to like practice and develop.
Like
so
the one beat I can do is like doom, doom, boom, like the We Will Rock You beat.
Yeah. Right. Doesn't involve too much coordination.
Yeah.
Like every limb doing something independent of one another.
Yeah. To me, it's like when you're, rubbing your head and you're patting your stomach.
Right.
It's like, how the hell are you splitting 16ths and fourths at the same time? It blows my mind.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and some people, have the passion to like, push through, and like it gets tedious and it gets tough, and it's challenging, but they have the stick-to-itiveness and the passion to break through and coordinate it all. And then there's another plateau you have to overcome.
Yeah. What are some of the guitar skills that you have that other people are kind of don't know how you do it?
Okay, so this sort of gets into the talent skill thing. I think probably if I had to pick like a baseline one, or like one of the crux of it is definitely, I think my ear is pretty strong, and that can go maybe woven into with like the whole concept of like perfect pitch, which I think I actually did a test once. Quick aside, it was through Berklee College of Music. I got it was a solicitation. They were looking to do a perfect pitch study. And so my dad being a musician, also they were curious if there was a family member who was also a musician to see how it might correlate. And coincidentally, it was the hospital that was like the local hospital on Long Island that my parents live closest to.
Yeah.
That was where the doctors were, or the researchers were, that were doing this study. So I was living in the Boston area at the time. What they did is they played for me over the phone. It was two halves. The first half was like a synthesizer pitch, maybe like a square wave or a sine wave. Can't remember what they used, but something like that. And then the second half was a piano.
Okay.
And my dad did the same one. He actually drove to the hospital where they were doing the research, did it in person. And my dad and I actually scored the exact same, and I think it was like an 80. They considered like 80% and above, like you meet the threshold for perfect pitch.
Yeah.
And I think we both scored like an 80, like it was like an 81 or an 80.1 or something like that, like just barely like got to that threshold.
Okay.
But the funny thing is, I did better on the synthesizer tones, and than my dad. And my dad, who plays piano, actually on that section scored 100%, and like a 60% on the synth tones. I don't remember what my breakdown was, but I remember the final. We both had the identical score, which I thought was interesting.
Definitely.
So I think the ear, having a good ear, helps. If I had to pick one thing, that I think your question was, other
skills,
musicians, other skills, or whatever, musicians or guitar players might, say, okay,
just be impressed by.
I think that's probably like a guiding one and a fundamental one.
Okay. How many chords do you know by heart?
Oh man, I mean,
As a jazz musician, I think you got to know the most out of any, right?
well, yeah, I think there's what you call movable chord forms, and so for beginning guitar players out there, you probably play a chord with an open string, and those are not really movable, and they're not movable because you can't slide up the neck, let's say 2 frets, and maintain the quality of the chord. So if you take a regular C chord, C major chord, and you slide it up 2 frets,
It's gonna be more ambient sounding.
yeah, exactly. And you have 2 open strings. You have an open C or an open G and an open E string in a regular sort of like cowboy chord, C chord. But if you take like an F chord, which, the sort of quote beginner F chord is a bar chord of some form,
Right.
which doesn't use any open strings, and you slide that up 2 frets, then you're playing what used to be an F major chord, 2 frets higher will now be a G major chord.
Mm-hmm.
So I know, a bunch of those movable chord forms.
Okay.
How many? I don't know.
And variations of each chord, I guess 3, right? You got to do
I don't know if I've ever counted. I mean, so you're getting maybe into the kind of concept of maybe for like drop 2s and whatnot, drop 3s, which means taking normally when you play a chord on a guitar, you play it in what's called root position, but which means that the root of the chord is your lowest note. But then if you play it in what's called first inversion, then the third of the chord now becomes your lowest note, and then that's a certain chord shape fingering.
Okay.
And then you have to, know your notes on the neck. And so the way I do it, probably the way a lot of guitar players do it, is, let's say it's I want to play a C major 7 in first inversion, and I want to have my lowest note on the 6th string. And, I know what that shape looks like, and I know I have to, fret the 12th fret on the low E string to get that first inversion to a C major 7.
Mm.
And then I know what a second inversion of that is, and I know I got to go up to the 15th fret, to play that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's knowing that for, knowing the notes in the neck, knowing what your chord shapes are, and combining them basically.
Mm. What has been your longest tour so far? You said 4 to 6 months was normally a cruise ship tour.
Yeah, it's funny. I had this conversation with Dave from Sweet and Juicy a while back when I was in that band briefly, and then I got a ship contract, and he started to talk about it as going on tour, and I never thought about it as going on tour, but I guess for all intents and purposes, it's kind of the same thing, whether you're
if you're in the Navy, you'd be going on tour.
I guess so. Yeah, I never quite thought of it that way, but it makes sense why you'd think that, whether it's like, driving around the Midwest with a bunch of guys in a van for a few weeks, or, on a luxury cruise liner. It's sort of
it's a little different.
A little different in content.
I was going to say, like, there's so many things you can't get on the ship unless you stop at a city, right?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, that's part of the whole cruise experience is, stopping at from port, which sounds really cool and glamorous, but you're usually only there from like 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's like live music, being a musician, want to see some of that, in a new city, but it's practically impossible because it always happens at night. At least been, the rare city, like I remember being in Nashville once years back, not on a ship, and they had, I think at noon, there was live music at noon,
Okay.
But most places are not like Nashville.
What's the earliest you've ever played a set?
Oh boy. I've had some brunch gigs.
Is it harder when you're tired?
Nah.
As a touring musician, you just gotta be professional and battle through, right?
Yeah, well, like on the ship, mostly it's in the evenings.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say like the general way it works on the ship has been we'll play. The 2 main things have been doing production shows, which means the musician in the group that it's called the orchestra or the show band. Orchestra is misleading because I think of violins and cellos.
Is it like a 10-piece band?
Usually, it's either a 7 or a 4-piece.
Okay.
More recently, it's been a 4-piece, just like a rhythm section: drums, bass, guitar, keyboards. And then I've also played in groups, which is a 7-piece, which has 1 trumpet, 1 saxophone, 1 trombone.
Is there a sound engineer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
So they do a good job of balancing all 7 instruments to sound equal.
Yeah, I think so.
Some are better than
it's
others.
their job.
Or some are better than others.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely feedback. I need more. I can't hear the bass. Can you give me more bass? So there's a sound check,
Yeah,
line
if you don't
check.
hear enough of yourself, you can think you had a bad show, right?
Sure.
Because you haven't heard yourself. How do you know if you're playing good?
Right. Yeah. Most recent contract that just wrapped up one a couple of weeks ago. Actually, was there for about 2.5 weeks. Interesting. The engineer, even though I guess there was a guitar amplifier there,
Yeah.
they wanted us to all plug into what they call the Axiom system, which is basically just plug the guitar into a DI box.
Okay.
And we're not actually pushing air through an amplifier, but it just went DI straight to the PA. And then we had to wear headphones and hear ourselves through our headphones.
So that was the monitoring system you had?
It was everything. It was the monitors and the guitar amp.
I can't imagine performing live with headphones.
That's what we did.
Was it difficult?
Yeah. It was an adjustment.
Yeah.
And for this particular show, what I had to do actually for one of the shows, it was it was sort of like a rock. I forgot what it was called, like Rock Legends or something like that.
Yeah.
All in America cruises. And there was a section where I had to take off the headphones. Kind of usually, I'm not the action, like I'm not the star of the show in any way, except at the very beginning where I had to take off the headphones, kind of go not quite center stage, but away from like my side of the stage, a little bit more, like onto like a little platform. Step up onto this platform, and like all the actors are sort of, essentially like kind of boogie while I'm like doing the guitar solo.
Okay.
So that was a little bit of an adjustment to like take the headphones off, go over there into that spot, play for half a minute, and then go back and try and figure out exactly where we are in the sheet music. So.
Yeah, definitely. Have you done vocals when you're on the cruise ship?
My very first contract. Yeah, that was a little different. That was what do they call it? Do they call it the party band? It was something like that. It wasn't the orchestra. And for that contract, we mostly played dining room dinner sets, basically jazz in the dining room at like 5 and 6:30, something along those lines. But and then occasionally, or I think it was like every Friday, we did like a pool set, and we played a lot of Motown, a little bit of classic rock.
Was it the same set, like every Friday that you did the Motown stuff?
Yeah, more or less.
Who's the one in charge of selecting the songs?
For that, I believe it was the music director, or band leader.
Okay.
Yeah, band master, I think what they call it. So yeah, sang a little bit during the pool sets, and then I think the same group did also once a week. We played like a 1950s sock hop kind of thing, and I sang like Johnny Be Good
while
like,
playing the guitar.
Yeah,
Johnny Be Good and guitar and vocal. That's incredible, man. I mean, that's like Marty McFly. That stuff right there.
Well, yeah, that's no better musician out there than him.
So that whole intro part, you just did that off of the sheet music?
Oh, I knew that.
Okay,
I studied that one. I mean, being a guitar player, it's sort of like you have to know.
And a Back to the Future fan.
Oh yeah, easily, yeah, for sure.
Do you think that influenced you to be a guitarist when you saw that? Because it did for me, and a skateboarder a little bit at least. Speaking of which, I now skateboard down my hallway to the trash compactor.
Oh, nice.
That's the only use I have for the skateboard, but it's great because it's a totally flat hallway, like totally flat ground indoors. When do you ever get the chance?
Right.
But normally when you skateboard, it's like roughest ground and it vibrates your head, so it's great. Let me tell you. But what was I asking you again?
Oh, was Marty McFly an influence?
Yeah. There you go.
I'm not sure if specifically that. No. I'm trying to think.
The band he played with.
Right. No, I mean, I saw that movie in the theater, and like it wasn't like I left the theater just I gotta get a guitar, but it did happen a few years after that.
I mean, you remember Johnny Be Good? You must have thought that song was great. I know I did, and Earth Angel. That was like the first time I heard that.
Right. Yeah,
the whole soundtrack I liked at the time.
Oh yeah.
What movies do you think did influence you as far as your music career, or TV shows, or books, or just things in life that you decided? What age?
I feel like there wasn't so much that wasn't an influence, just literally the music itself. I remember it's funny, I had a friend who I was like better friends with like in like elementary school, and then kind of lost touch, but like still in touch. And he had an older brother who, like, I'm the oldest in my family. It's me and my brother who's younger, but 2.5 years younger.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have like an older brother to like get me into music, anything like that. But my friend did. And then kind of like, remember, I don't know how this conversation happened exactly, but I remember it being like something along the lines of I was interested in like learning more about music beyond just what was like currently playing on pop radio at the time.
Yeah.
And it was like a choice. Do you want Led Zeppelin or do you want a Pink Floyd cassette? And I was like, oh, let's get some Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin. Try that out.
Yeah.
And I remember, I just remember like in the 80s, like seeing like the older kids with like the longer hair, and they would have like, what is it, Eddie, Iron Maiden mascot, with like the skeleton, and like these sort of like gruesome, like macabre sort of like images of like kind of gross looking, you know what I'm talking about? Eddie Iron Maiden.
No, I don't.
Know what I'm talking about?
No.
Oh, okay. I have to show you just because I think you'll be like, oh, that guy. Yeah, check it out.
Okay. Yeah, I see it. It's kind of like reminds me of Megadeth, actually.
Right. So like there'd be like the older kids, smoking, wearing these T-shirts, and so like I kind of had like this. I don't know. It sounds so funny and almost quaint today, but but apparently like the satanic panic of the 1980s was a real thing, and so I don't know, just being a little kid and like seeing these sorts of images, like kind of have that connection with it.
Okay.
And so anyway, I remember like saying, okay, I want Zeppelin. And the first song I hear is Immigrant Song with that, and I just thought it sounded like so devilish.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much I heard that and I wanted to play guitar, but like soon after that, I did start to play guitar.
Nice.
Same person, in fact, kind of.
How long did you take guitar lessons?
So in high school, I took lessons for about 2.5 years. Yeah, that sounds right. 2.5 years.
That's it. And then you started teaching yourself, I guess.
Yeah, I was always doing other things beyond whatever homework and assignments I got from my actual teacher. And then I remember it seemed like the lessons had kind of plateaued where like I felt like I was getting good content, and then after a while, I don't know, it was the stuff I was getting didn't felt like I was being pushed anymore, and didn't feel challenged, and for whatever reason didn't seek out another teacher. Maybe it was I don't know, hard to say exactly why. But yeah, I think I taught myself, whatever it was, like I said, I have a pretty good ear, so. Would figure things out by ear. I guess I got books, guitar magazines, there'd be columns or transcriptions, just sort of piece it together that way.
Yeah. Did you ever get lonely on the cruise ship? Was it worth the money?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's definitely some amount of that. Lonely. I don't know if I'd quite exactly put it that way. I can understand. And there's certainly people around, and you share a cabin, a pretty small cabin at that. I guess lonely is a good way to put it. Now that you say it, sometimes, sure. I try and have some kind of project to work on. Generally, it's been just practicing, whether it's practicing whatever it is for the show that night, for the guest entertainers.
Yeah.
Or just remember one of my second contract, I was with some really great, strong players, one of whom had just earned his master's degree in jazz performance. Really great player, really great saxophonist. And I was like, wow, and I, at that point, I only had like 2 semesters at Berkeley, and, my private lessons. I
Yeah.
hadn't gone through a formal program. My bachelor's was in psychology. So I had done a lot of self teaching. But then I heard some of these players in this contract, a lot younger, and it was like, wow, the kids coming out of music school sound fucking great.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can curse.
Yeah, you can. Were your parents musicians?
My dad was a musician. Yeah, my dad got his master's at Juilliard, got his PhD at New York University.
What did he teach you?
He was a little bit more, I felt, like a resource. It wasn't so much that we had structured weekly lessons or anything like that. It was more when I got a little older and was sort of like pushing myself in music. He has a good ear too, so like, I can't figure this out. Can you help me with this?
Yeah.
And probably the best piece of advice that I got from him in terms of, and maybe it was just a little self-serving because he didn't want me to keep bugging him. But what he said was, if you can sing it, you can play it. And I thought that, maybe it took a little while to like really kind of internalize it and embrace it and apply it. But that was good, and ultimately it gave me confidence to do that. And I didn't have to bother him anymore. And, was able to pick up things on my own. It wasn't just that. It was definitely like some music theory questions, whatnot. But just to be able to, go downstairs and ask somebody who would know the answer, that was huge.
Plus, you have the environment of them encouraging your music instead of discouraging, like it's not a real job and stuff.
No.
Really?
I wouldn't say that. Yeah.
They were like, you're not going to get it. It's too hard to get a job as a musician. Were they telling you that?
Basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you just did it anyways.
Well, yeah, and that's the whole thing why I didn't immediately pursue music after high school is I felt like he would know, and he did know. And, what he did was work as a sort of like your elementary school music teacher. And then actually when I was funny because he did that for years. And then when I was high school age, he suddenly transitioned to high school himself, teaching music theory in high school. But he was sort of like your elementary school chorus teacher.
Okay.
When I was younger. And like, if you remember, maybe that guy was responsible for like running the school musical.
Okay.
He was that guy too. So I remember going at least once or twice.
So from his experience, where you can go is to be a music teacher in Comac. What you decided was you're going to be a performing musician, though. Yeah,
and that was definitely at what I wanted. Like in a perfect world, that's what I would do. Yes, absolutely.
Are you getting more into recording, or you think that you're always going to be like more into live music? Like, would you ever get your recording onto a TV show or a movie?
Trying. There's all sorts of like Song Trader is one out there just now. I've recently discovered. I think they're somewhat new.
Okay.
And they, so the special purpose recording, I uploaded all the songs, and they have, a music wanted list. It wasn't especially long, but there was one that, listing that definitely corresponded to what I thought they were looking for. And they have an example of a song that says, in the spirit of something like this. So I listened to it. It's like, oh, well, I've got something on this recording I did that I think fits the bill. And then so I guess they give you some credits for free. And then it's like 16 credits to submit for this one opportunity. And, you just throw your hat into the ring and see what happens.
Yeah. As far as relationships, has it been harder or easier being a musician?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've necessarily always been in a relationship and then a cruise ship contract comes along.
Right. Like, did you have a girlfriend when you ever got a cruise ship tour contract?
Yeah, that has happened,
And did you break up, or did you decide to do long distance?
That particular time I wound up not taking the contract. Yeah, I mean, we kind of came up with an arrangement for me to stay, which was good. And I was kind of burnt out on ships and leaving town for
touring. Yeah,
leaving town for another 4 months I didn't want to do it, but we essentially came up with a plan and figured out what to do to so I wouldn't have to do it. And I've kind of stuck with that ever since. No more. I haven't done the 4-month contracts since it's been a few years. And I've done as long as 2 months, but other than that, it's always been about 2 or 3 weeks. But 4 months is just entirely way too long. And that's, I did a 6-month contract, and there's other ship workers who were there for 8 or 9 months, and that's just, extremely long. And
yeah,
one of the things that I mentioned kind of in passing that I had done it, I think I was 27 years old, did about a 3-week contract with Carnival, and it's kind of since I kind of understood then that there's the more you do this, like if you're just going to be on the ship for 4 months at a time, how are you going to transition out of that? There's not like the equivalent gig waiting for you on land to just walk into.
Yeah.
And I it seemed like people who were older, had done it for years, were kind of angry people, kind of like unpleasant to be around, probably drank a lot. And I've certainly met, people like that. It's not like everybody, clearly.
Yeah.
But it seems to be the sort of thing that, has its time, has its place, probably when you're in your 20s or 30s. And then it runs its course, and most people kind of move out, but not everybody. But the ones who don't and stick around just seem to be just unpleasant, basically.
Are you still doing guitar lessons?
Trying to.
When's the last time you did a Skype guitar lesson?
It's been a while. I did have the one student who I taught when I was in Boston, who I was working as a GPS trainer, and he was like I had like 2 or 3 students. So I had done it full time when I was younger, was now like doing office work. And then I had this one student who I met with for about a year, decided I was going to leave Boston. I mean, move to Portland. And it was actually his idea. He wanted to continue in some way. And he's like, "Have you ever heard of Skype?" And I said, "Well, sure." And he said, "What do you think about doing Skype lessons?" And I said, "Yeah, that's fine." And so it worked out great. I was in Portland teaching him. And then when I was working on ships, I wound up being able to teach him when I was doing ships as well. Would have to find some empty room, like a conference room or whatever on the ship. And we got a Wi-Fi device, and was able to just continue doing those lessons with him, which was great. But it's been a while. Probably taught that student for at least 3 years, maybe 4 years, 3 of which were using Skype.
Okay.
Yeah, I try to make a go of it in little things here and there, trying to promote that. Never really took off. One of the things I did learn moving from Boston to Portland is just how, I guess, much stronger the economy is in Boston, and so, which means that the pay rate for lessons here is a lot lower. And I don't know if there's just that much more competition that drives the price lower, or if it is I have a feeling it's the economy, just like judging from the rent you pay in Boston compared to the rent you pay here. Portland, it's just not the same. So,
did you visit any unusual places
on the ships?
Yeah.
Unusual? I'm not sure about unusual, but just like cool places. Like what comes to mind is I had a contract out of Melbourne, Australia, sailed to a bunch of ports in New Zealand.
Oh, did you see any spiders in Australia?
No, nothing. No life-threatening wildlife, from what I can remember. But I did see the Great Barrier Reef on that contract, which is cool.
Yeah, well, you have the chance.
Yeah, no kidding. That's a really shocking one, because
Seriously?
I think it was 2014, 2015. I think it was 2015 when I was there, like early 2015. And apparently, like, it's only been 4 years, but apparently, like, literally since I've been there,
it's like gone.
Half of it has bleached or something.
Yeah.
Unbelievable like that. But it was, if I had to pick like one one destination on like on like various different contracts.
Yeah.
That's the one that was like, man, that's the memorable one. That was really just mind blowing. You know, I had mentioned the one out of Hawaii. I had a contract out of Shanghai, going to Japan and Korea.
Nice.
I had one out of Southampton. This was a really cool one. A couple of weeks cruise in the Mediterranean, back to England. A couple of weeks in the Baltic, back to England. A week in different ports in Norway. Did that whole thing a second time. Left England for the final time via on our way to New York City, but via a few ports in Iceland. So I went to see the Blue Lagoon, which is cool. And then a couple of ports in Canada before making it to New York. So that overall, that was just a nice contract where there was just a lot of variety. And it's sort of like a trade-off with the ship, because like the Hawaii contract was literally like every Sunday or every Saturday rather, new cruise, Honolulu, every Sunday and Monday, overnight in Maui, which is cool. Yeah. And Tuesday was another island, a couple of ports in the Big Island. Thursday and Friday were overnight in Kauai, and then back to Honolulu. I just did it all over again. So very repetitious, which could be cool because I actually wound up meeting some people in those ports.
What are you doing on downtime? Just socializing, practicing?
Yeah.
Watching Lucifer on Netflix?
If only.
Right.
Before yeah, well, I should mention streaming or using Wi-Fi on a ship is extremely pricey. It was like the good deal that they had for crew members. This most recent contract was $40 for 673 megabytes. Yeah, 673.
Seriously.
Yeah, 673 megabytes of data for $40, and which you have to like use very judiciously. I think that's the right word.
Yeah.
So yeah, as far as downtime, reading, practicing, watching movies. Though this most recent contract, I didn't really watch much movies.
Is there a lot of couples on these cruises?
Like passengers, or
like are the passengers typically coupled up?
Oh, absolutely.
So your chance of having any like fun as far as that goes is kind of slim to none.
Yeah, and well, there's a couple of things. I'd say it definitely skews towards an older demographic, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. It does depend probably on the cruise.
There's also the crew, though, right?
Sure. Honestly, I mean, so I've definitely seen articles that talk about like, oh, it's just like everybody's hooking up. It's like a college, college dorm, college experience.
Depending on the person that goes. Yeah.
But at the same time, the guys definitely outnumber the gals. Like, if not 2-1, maybe 3-1 or more.
What do you think that is? It's like friends going on a cruise together and stuff.
Well, I'm talking more about crew.
Okay.
More about crew members.
Crew members. Yeah, maybe doing strong ship stuff. I don't know.
There's a certain amount of that. Yeah. You know, maybe it also depends on the department. You know, like sanitation's a big department. Housekeeping.
So the girls don't want those jobs.
I guess maybe there's something about, you know, and I will say, you know, they're generally from countries like Indonesia and the Philippines.
That's the workers.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
So
hired on like a contract basis or something.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. The way I understand it, it seems to be sort of like, you know, how American companies will set up shop overseas, like in China, for example, you know, because the labor is cheaper.
Okay.
It seems to be sort of like the reverse because the labor is cheaper. Like they recruit from these places, and they can probably just pay them less because they're like the dollar just goes further in their country.
Yeah.
It seems to be like, but I think that's why.
Yeah, I was in the Philippines and the dollar went way further. It's a good place to retire for retired vets, I hear.
So I would imagine it's something along the lines of, you know, as a female, maybe you don't want to be on a ship for 8 months.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. But I mean, there's certainly women there, no doubt about it. But they are outnumbered. You know, there's definitely more guys than gals.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah. As far as like guests go, it's an older, like I would say, like 60s, 70s, older. But there's occasionally younger people. It does depend on the cruise, where it leaves from, how long it leaves.
Do they pay for your meals?
Yeah, everything's included.
Is it a good like sleeping space?
Just trying to get this thing in motion.
Is it like a cot?
I'm trying to get your body going. Come on. Just trying to get your mind open.
And maybe share a cabin.
Your music is coming on cracking, so you're gonna end the show.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Thank you for coming in. If you get any more interesting content, maybe come and talk about any TV shows and movies, just interesting news, yeah, how you come back.
Yeah.
Absolutely.